He raised his rifle, and then he saw the eyes. Not hostile. Just, human. Small, gray, and too old for the face that held them. December 1944. Western Germany. The ruins near Aachen were silent in a way that made silence a living thing. Snow fell sideways through roofless homes, hissing as it touched the hot metal of what had burned. The air was thick with the smell of brick dust and the faint sweetness of frozen smoke. Sergeant Thomas Gray led the patrol through what had once been a street, boots crunching on glass that used to be windows. They were 5 men, half frozen, moving with the kind of tiredness that no amount of rest could fix. The town had been shelled 3 nights before, and there was nothing left but chimneys and the echo of things that used to matter. Someone's radio crackled with static, someone else cursed quietly and kicked a door that wasn't there anymore. "Keep sharp," Gray said. His voice came out dry. "We're close to the line." They turned a corner and stopped. At first, he thought it was movement, an animal, maybe. Then he saw the shape crouched between the ruins of 2 walls, small and still, wrapped in something that might once have been a coat. One of the men muttered, "Kid. What the hell?" and the next second rifles came up automatically. War had taught them that anything could kill you, especially something that looked harmless. Gray motioned for them to hold. He stepped forward slowly, rifle still raised. "Hey," he said softly, the word strange in the frozen air. "You alone?" The figure didn't move. Then a head lifted, hair the color of dust, cheeks streaked with soot. A boy, maybe 8 or 9. His lips were blue, eyes too large for his face. He was clutching something in his hands. Gray thought it was a grenade, and his heart jumped, but when the boy turned slightly, he saw it was just a chunk of bread, hard and half-eaten. "Christ," someone whispered behind him. Could be a trap. Gray ignored it. He lowered his weapon a little. "Kid," he tried again, pointing toward himself, then down the road. "American. You, safe." The boy just stared, chest rising in tiny, fast breaths. Then Gray saw what was behind him. A shape under a collapsed doorway, a woman, motionless, her hair spread across the snow like ink. The boy had been sitting beside her all this time, guarding what was left. The youngest man in the patrol swore under his breath. "He's German, right? You want me to?" "Don't," Gray said, sharper than he meant to. The barrel of his rifle felt suddenly wrong in his hands, too heavy and too clean. The wind shifted, and ashes from some unseen fire drifted across them, fine as dust. Gray stepped closer until the boy's reflection appeared in the dull metal of his weapon. He could see every detail, the cracked lips, the trembling fingers, the way the bread was pressed so tight against his chest it left crumbs on his collar. The sergeant stopped within arm's reach. His gloves were stiff with frost. He knelt down slowly, setting his rifle on the ground. The boy's eyes followed the motion, wary but unblinking. "It's okay," Gray murmured, not sure who he was talking to. He reached out a hand, palm open. The boy flinched, then hesitated. There was a long pause, just breathing, snow, and the faint creak of something falling far away. Finally, the child took one step forward, enough for Gray to see the raw skin under the cuffs of his coat. "See?" Gray whispered. "No harm." Behind him, Private Lynch said, "Sarge, we got orders. If there's movement, we—" Gray turned his head slowly. "He's not movement. He's a boy." No one answered. They were all staring now, grown men with rifles, watching a child stand among ruins that used to be home. Somewhere, a loose shutter clattered in the wind, and the sound was enough to make everyone flinch. Gray picked up his rifle again, but he didn't aim. He slung it over his shoulder. "We're taking him," he said. "Back to camp." Lynch spat into the snow. "And if he's wired? If he's bait?" Gray looked down at the boy, then at the woman behind him. Her face was already white with frost. "Then I'll take that risk." The boy blinked once, twice, then reached out his hand, not to shake, not to ask, but to give. He held out the bread. Gray stared at it, unable to move. It was the smallest, most human thing he'd seen in years. Snow began to fall harder, thick flakes melting on his collar. The boy's hand trembled from the cold. Gray took the bread, broke it in two, and gave half back. The patrol moved again, silent now, passing through the skeleton of the village. Gray walked at the front, the boy trailing close behind, bare feet crunching in the snow. Somewhere in the distance, artillery murmured like thunder too far away to be real. He glanced over his shoulder once, making sure the boy was still there. The eyes met his again, unblinking, calm, impossible. And in that look, something inside him shifted. Orders, lines, enemies, all of it cracked like ice. For the first time in years, Thomas Gray realized he didn't know what the word enemy meant anymore. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Snow drifted sideways across the forest road, soft but endless, coating the trucks in white armor. The field headquarters squatted in a clearing, a handful of tents, an idling generator, and the sour smell of diesel mixing with coffee. Inside the command tent, lanterns threw shadows that jittered across maps and faces. The warmth felt wrong after the ruins. It made everything too human again. They brought the boy in without a word. His small figure disappeared inside a soldier's blanket, his hair dusted white like frost on dead grass. He held the same crust of bread from the village, as if it were proof that he still existed. Lieutenant Merrick stood at the center of it all, his uniform immaculate, boots polished even in mud. His voice was clipped, efficient. Report. Gray recited the facts, the ruins, the woman's body, the boy alone. His tone was calm, but his throat felt tight. Merrick nodded once, never looking at the child. Send him back with the supply convoy. He'll be screened at Corps. Could be a courier. He's starving, Gray said. Then he'll eat in the rear, Merrick replied, already turning back to his maps. We can't feed every orphan between here and Berlin. The words landed like stones. The boy didn't react, maybe he didn't understand. Gray reached into his jacket, pulled out a K ration, and unwrapped a small bar of chocolate. He held it out. The boy stared, unmoving. Around them, the tent crackled with typewriter keys and quiet argument. Then, slowly, the child took the chocolate, bit off a corner, and stopped chewing halfway through, as if the sweetness hurt. Private Lynch muttered, could still be acting. Gray didn't look at him. If he is, give him an Oscar. The boy ate the rest in silence. His hands shook so slightly you wouldn't notice unless you were watching too closely. Gray was. A clerk with a phrasebook tried a few words in German, name. Family. House. The boy only whispered something, soft, uncertain. No one caught it. Merrick sighed and scribbled a note on a clipboard. Tag him and load him on the convoy. And Sergeant, don't start a rescue mission. We have orders. That word, tag, hung in the air like the sound of a bullet casing hitting concrete. When the tent emptied, Gray sat near the stove, the boy beside him on an overturned crate. The light was low, flickering. Snow hissed against the canvas. Gray opened his notebook, wrote in his tight, soldier's handwriting, he's not afraid. Just hungry. And something else, trust. The kind I've forgotten how to deserve. Outside, the wind rose. Engines coughed awake. The convoy was ready. A runner entered, holding a paper tag tied to a piece of string. He handed it to Gray without a word. The card was stamped AGE, unknown. Language, German. Destination, rear. Gray tied it gently to the boy's coat button. The child didn't resist. He just watched the knot being tied, as if realizing what it meant. Gray looked down and said quietly, it's just so they know who you are. The lie felt too easy, too practiced. They stepped out into the night. The world was white and still except for the rumble of idling trucks. Snowflakes danced in the headlights. A corporal lifted the boy into the back of a transport, tucking him between crates marked rations. "You coming, Sergeant?" the corporal asked. Gray hesitated. "Orders say the kid goes alone." The words tasted like metal. The truck groaned forward, wheels grinding through slush. The boy's eyes met his for the last time, wide, unreadable, and strangely calm. No fear. No plea. Just quiet trust, as if he already knew how soldiers break promises. When the taillights vanished into the storm, the clearing fell silent again. Gray stood there, coat heavy with snow, until his shoulders began to shake, not from cold, but from the feeling that he'd just let something important drive away. Back in his tent, he found the boy's tag duplicate lying on the table, blank and coiled with string. He picked it up, turned it over once, then left it there. He unbuttoned his jacket, walked to the supply hut, and handed it to the quartermaster. "There's a kid on that convoy with no coat," he said. "Send this after him." The man frowned. "Since when do we outfit Germans?" Gray didn't answer. He stepped back into the snow, shirt thin against the cold. His breath rose like smoke. For the first time since the war began, he had broken an order, and it felt like the only thing that made sense. He watched the road where the truck had gone, a black line vanishing into white. The storm swallowed everything, the sound of engines, the boy's face, even the question forming in his mind. If a man chooses mercy once, what else will he be willing to disobey tomorrow? Dawn crept in gray and cold, sliding across tents and frozen mud. The guns had moved on, leaving a silence too heavy to trust. Smoke from the cook fire mixed with frost, the air sharp as iron. Near the motor pool, the boy sat by a barrel, blanket slipping off his shoulders, helmet too large in his lap. Gray found him there, crouched and watchful, eyes steady. "Morning," he said. The boy blinked, not answering. A few men gathered, curiosity was the only luxury left. Private Lynch, the medic, a clerk with a phrasebook. The clerk tried German, "We heist du." The boy frowned, then whispered a word soft as breath. "Vati." Lynch scribbled it down. "That his name?" The medic shook his head. "No. That's father." The words seemed to hang between them. The boy repeated it once, quieter. Gray felt it catch somewhere deep, like a hook under the ribs. He knelt until they were eye level. "Your father," he said softly. The boy nodded, eyes flicking toward the road that led back to the ruins. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin chain with a metal tag, small, cold, stamped with letters and numbers. Gray took it gently. "His?" The boy nodded again. His fingers clenched as if to take it back. Gray returned it, and the boy hid it beneath his shirt. Around them, the camp stirred, men shouting, trucks coughing awake. Normal sounds that suddenly felt obscene. A runner arrived with a folded envelope. "Orders, Sergeant. The kid goes to the rear at 1100. Counterintelligence wants him screened." Gray read the paper once, though a single line was enough. "Transport child, possible courier." He slid it into his pocket beside the dog tag. The metal pressed through the fabric like a second heartbeat. The men drifted away. Gray sat beside the boy, steam curling from their breath. "You'll be safe back there," he said, knowing it wasn't true. The boy just watched him, quiet, unreadable. The blanket slipped again. Gray pulled it up, tucking it around him like a promise. When the engines roared, the runner returned. "Sergeant, convoy's ready." Gray didn't move. The boy stood because he did. Together they walked toward the waiting trucks. Snow began to fall, thin and slow. A corporal lifted the boy onto the tailgate, tucking him between crates marked rations. "You coming?" the corporal asked. Gray hesitated. "Orders say he goes alone." His voice sounded hollow even to himself. The truck lurched forward, tires grinding over ice. The boy's eyes met his, no fear, only calm, a kind of trust that hurt to see. Then the taillights vanished into the trees. Gray stayed there long after the road emptied. The sound of the convoy faded into the wind. He looked down at his gloves, saw the boy's blanket fibers clinging to the wool. When he went back inside, the extra transport tag lay waiting on the table, blank, with its loop of string coiled like a question. He stared at it for a long time, then folded his field jacket and carried it to the supply tent. "There's a kid on that convoy with no coat," he said. "Send this after him." The quartermaster frowned. "We don't outfit Germans, Sergeant." Gray didn't answer. He turned and walked back into the snow, shirt thin against the cold. His breath rose like smoke, vanishing into the gray. For the first time since the war began, Thomas Gray had broken an order. And as he stared down the road where the truck had gone, one thought followed him like a shadow: if mercy starts once, it may never stop. The truck stood frozen in rows, their engines ticking softly in the cold. Snow crusted on the canvas roofs, the sky low and gray. The air smelled of diesel, smoke, and coffee burned black. Inside a tent marked PW, the light from a single lantern swung slowly, painting the cots in amber and shadow. The boy sat on one of them, straight-backed, swallowed by an American field jacket too large for his frame. His feet didn't reach the floor. Beside him, Sergeant Thomas Gray sat with a tin mug between his hands, more for heat than for drinking. Every few minutes, he'd reach over and fix the boy's collar, as though that small act could push the war further away. Men drifted in and out of the tent, guards, clerks, mechanics with excuses to stay near the stove. When their eyes found the boy, conversation stopped. The lantern hummed. A silence too careful to be natural filled the space. A heavy voice cut through it. "What the hell is this?" The master sergeant stood by the entrance, his breath steaming in the cold. His eyes moved from Gray to the boy, to the jacket. "You adopt him or something?" "That's one of them. You forget what they did to ours." Gray looked up, jaw tightening. "He's a child." "Yeah." The sergeant's tone hardened. "And his father? Probably shot our guys in the woods last week. Don't tell me he's just a child." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the lantern seemed to hold its breath. Gray's voice came out low, rough: "He's not the one holding a rifle." The sergeant stared a moment longer, then shook his head. "You're getting soft, Gray. Command's already got orders, he goes to the MPs in the morning. They'll know what to do." The flap opened again, letting in a slice of cold air. A captain entered, young but with the face of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. His gloves dripped meltwater onto the floor. "Sergeant Gray," he said briskly. "You'll escort the German boy to the military police detachment at the rail yard. Transfer him at 0700. Keep your distance." Gray's answer came automatic. "Yes, sir." The captain's eyes flicked to the boy's jacket. "Return that item to supply. We don't issue gear to prisoners." Then he left, leaving a gust of cold and the faint smell of tobacco. The master sergeant followed, but his voice lingered behind him. "I get it. You feel sorry. But don't stand in front of the machine, Gray. It'll roll right over you." Gray sat down again. The boy hadn't moved. His hands were folded neatly in his lap, the sleeves of the jacket hiding his fingers. He looked at Gray, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet waiting. The kind of patience that made Gray feel like the smaller one. Outside, the camp was settling for the night, trucks cooling, guards switching posts, the hum of generators fading into wind. Gray stared at the paper on the stool beside him: transfer to MP custody. It looked harmless. Words always did. He opened his notebook and wrote: "They will file him, tag him, and forget him. The system remembers numbers, not faces." He stopped. The page trembled faintly in his hand, and he closed the book before the words could turn into something dangerous. The boy reached for the tin mug, empty but still warm. He set it carefully on the floor beside Gray's boot. "Danky," he whispered. The single word struck harder than a shout. Gray rubbed his eyes. "You should sleep," he said softly. The boy lay back on the cot, jacket still wrapped tight around him, eyes half open like someone afraid of dreams. Gray watched until his breathing steadied. Then he stood, stepped outside. The sky was clear now, stars burning sharp as glass. He could hear laughter from another tent, short, forced, men pretending the war was far away. He walked to the perimeter, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The guards didn't question him, nobody questioned much at this hour. He stood by a truck, watching his breath curl upward into the dark. Tomorrow, the boy would be gone, just another record in a ledger, another nameless line. The army would move on, neat as a typewriter. Gray would sign the form, salute, and return to duty. Everything would stay in order. But when he turned back toward the tent, he saw the faint outline of the boy sleeping under his jacket, and something in him refused to rest. That night, the camp slept. The war slept. But Thomas Gray did not. Morning pulled itself over the convoy like a damp blanket. Mist lay low across the pines, frost braided the ropes on the tailgates. Engines idled in a steady, sleep, thick rhythm, exhaust drifting sideways into a sky the color of tin. Orders had been shouted at dawn, now the column rolled, 2.5 tons groaning, chains rasping, canvas snapping like tired flags. Gray rode in the back of the lead truck with the boy beside him on a bench of splintered planks. The field jacket swallowed the child, his knees knocked under the hem. Between them, a crate stenciled rations, sea supply ticked with the cold. Far off, artillery thudded in a polite, indifferent way, as if the war were clearing its throat on another stage. The driver ground through second gear. Snow pebbled the windshield and stuck. Gray's breath smoked through a gap in the canvas. He checked his watch, then the road, then the boy's hands, pale and still. Every few minutes he tightened the scarf around the child's neck, the motions automatic, unmilitary. The transfer form sat folded in Gray's breast pocket, edge soft from being touched too often. They passed a crossroad where a signpost had lost its arrows. Farther on, a village came into view, just chimneys and teeth of walls. In a doorway stood two children, bareheaded, faces pinched by cold and something older. One held a tin pail, the other nothing at all. Their eyes tracked the convoy without accusation. Gray felt the weight of their stare long after the truck rattled past. He looked at the boy and saw the same look, smaller only by height. "Water?" Gray said, offering the canteen. The boy took it two-handed, sipped, then wiped the rim with the cuff as if that were a rule. He glanced up through the slant of falling snow, then pointed with the canteen, past the truck, past the trees, to a patch of low cloud where light pressed faintly. "Vaitai," he whispered, and tapped his chest. He dug inside the jacket and brought out the thin chain, the dog tag clinking against the canteen. He lifted it toward the sky like a tiny mirror, then lowered it and set it in Gray's palm. Gray closed his fingers around the steel and felt the cold climb his wrist. He looked past the boy to the road unwinding between firs, to the signage that would bring them to the rail spur and the MPs and the big ledger that eats small names. Escort the subject. Transfer custody. Return to unit. The truck lurched through a pothole. The boy's shoulder bumped his and stayed there, trusting as sleep. Gray's mouth tasted of metal. He handed the tag back. The boy tucked it away with a seriousness that made the gesture feel ceremonial. Another village slid by, roof beams black against snow, a stove dragged into a yard like furniture abandoned mid-sentence. In the road, a woman lifted a hand, palm out, not to stop them but to measure the distance between what passed and what remained. Gray looked away first. The column slowed for a bend where a bridge had been patched with logs. A military police jeep waited on the far side, two white-helmeted silhouettes already turning toward the convoy. The rails beyond it ran east, disappearing into fog. Gray felt his foot shift before his head allowed it. Hold it, he called to the driver, thumping the cab. The truck braked, the benches shuddering, men cursed into scarves. The MP raised a gloved hand, impatient, routine. Gray's heartbeat climbed into his throat and sat there. Escort. Transfer. Return. The words were easy. The picture they contained was not, a desk, a stamp, the jacket taken, the tag bagged and filed, the boy walking a hallway that smelled of bleach and decisions. He looked at the boy. The child was watching him, not the jeep, not the rails. Snow had sifted into his hair, bright as ash. Vaitai, he said again, softer, and lifted 2 fingers toward the sky as if to introduce Gray to something neither of them could translate. The driver twisted in his seat. We rolling, Sarge. MPs looked jumpy. Gray's hand found the sideboard. He felt the grain, the cold, the vibration of the engine. He pictured a map, lines, arrows, destinations. Then he pictured something without lines, a road that wasn't there until a man chose it. Take the farm track, he heard himself say. The what? Gray leaned forward, voice steady now. Left before the bridge. Along the creek. It loops back south. That's not on the route. It is now. The driver stared a half-second too long. Then he shrugged, ground the truck into reverse, and crabbed it off the hardpack. Chains bit ice, canvas cracked, someone swore that they'd be writing letters for this. The MP Jeep started forward, horn short and sharp. Gray lifted a hand and waved them off with a confidence that felt borrowed. The truck slid, caught, and found the rutted lane, trees closing in like a door. Behind, the convoy hesitated, then followed out of habit or faith or laziness. The Jeep's horn dwindled, then was gone under the hush of pines. The road narrowed to 2 brown ruts with snow piled like shoulders. Water ran under ice, whispering its own orders. The boy pressed closer on the bench, small heat radiating through wool. Gray kept his eyes on the track, jaw set, hands calm because they had to be. The transfer form burned against his chest like a small, square coal. For the first time in years, he wasn't following a map. He was following a feeling that didn't fit in a report. The lane kinked around a fallen tree, then opened onto a white field where the creek split the land in 2 black lines. Ahead, the fog thickened into a wall. Gray downshifted and steered into it. And somewhere behind the mist, the war was already changing its mind about which road belonged to whom. Snow fell in thin, nervous lines, whispering against the metal of the truck. Gray had turned off the engine an hour ago, but the sound of distant artillery still pulsed faintly through the woods, a heartbeat belonging to someone else's war. The radio spat static, then silence, then a single word repeated again and again, contact. Contact. He looked at the boy beside him, wrapped in a blanket and his oversized jacket, face pale but calm. Stay close, Gray said, though the boy wouldn't have understood the words. They left the truck and crossed a narrow field, boots sinking in soft snow. The cold burned in Gray's lungs, the air stank of cordite and pine. Then the first shell came. The blast hit behind them, a wet, cracking thunder that folded the horizon. Gray threw himself over the boy. Dirt and snow lifted like water. The second explosion came closer, shaking the air apart. It's just thunder, he whispered into the child's ear, but the lie broke in his throat. They ran toward a barn at the edge of the field, half collapsed, roof sagging, doors torn away. Inside, it smelled of straw and smoke. Light slipped through holes in the walls like ghostly spears. Gray pushed the boy into a corner behind a stack of hay, then slid down beside him, chest heaving. A sharp pain tore through his shoulder. He looked down and saw blood seeping through his sleeve. Splinters. He pressed his hand against the wound and hissed. The boy stared, eyes huge, then tore the scarf from around his own neck. Without hesitation, he pressed it against Gray's shoulder. The gesture was so sure, so deliberate, that Gray couldn't speak. Good, he murmured, teeth tight. Hold it there. Outside, Voices rose, German, clear and close. Boots crushed the snow. A patrol. The boy froze. Gray put a finger to his lips, but the child already understood. The hand that held the scarf didn't tremble. Through a crack in the wall, Gray saw them, 5 men, rifles slung, breath clouding the air. One carried a Panzerfaust on his back. They moved with that quick, efficient calm of soldiers who still believed the front was where they stood. One of them stopped and turned toward the barn. Gray stopped breathing. The man said something. Gray caught only one word, Hugh. Hey. He laughed. Another answered, Spader. Later. They moved on. The silence afterward was a wound of its own. Gray exhaled slowly. The boy, still pressing the scarf to his shoulder, looked up at him and placed his free hand gently over Gray's mouth, as if to seal the silence completely. Gray nodded. The pain dulled, replaced by something heavier, an ache he couldn't name. More shells sounded, farther now, dull and distant. The barn groaned, dust drifting from the beams. Gray leaned his head back, feeling his pulse in the wound. The boy's fingers were sticky with his blood, but he didn't seem to notice. He kept his hand there, calm, unflinching. Minutes passed. The voices outside faded. The world settled into the kind of stillness that only comes after violence, a waiting silence. Gray heard the faint hum of a tank engine somewhere beyond the trees, then nothing but the snow against the roof. He wanted to tell the boy something, to promise safety, or to thank him, but every word felt too small. Instead, he lifted his good arm, rested it briefly on the child's back. "We'll move when it's quiet," he whispered. "Soon." The boy nodded, eyes never leaving his face. He pressed the scarf a little harder, mimicking the firmness of a medic. Somewhere beyond the barn, a flare went up, painting the snow pale green. For an instant, light leaked through the cracks, washing over them both. Then came the sound, boots again, closer this time. 2, maybe 3. Different cadence. Heavier. Not running. Searching. Gray's heart stuttered. He slid his hand toward the pistol on his hip but stopped halfway. One wrong noise, one breath too loud, and they were finished. The boy seemed to sense it. Without looking away from Gray, he reached out, laid his small hand back across Gray's lips, and whispered one word he must have learned from soldiers long gone, Rua. Quiet. Gray closed his eyes. The world held its breath with him. The boots reached the doorway, paused. The barn door creaked. For a heartbeat, the war stood still, listening. And then, as if obeying the boy's hand, it moved on. The footsteps faded into the snow. Gray waited a full minute before breathing again. The scarf was soaked through, the pain pulsing steady but bearable. The boy finally lifted his hand from Gray's mouth, slow and deliberate, as though finishing a prayer. Outside, another shell landed somewhere far away, but inside that barn, everything was still. For the first time since the war began, Thomas Gray wasn't sure who had saved whom. Night laid a net of cold between the trees. Snow sifted down through black branches, making the beams of a few nervous flashlights look solid. Somewhere behind them the road groaned with armor, but here, in the alder and fir, the world was a hush broken by boots and breath. Gray and the boy had waited out the day in the ruined barn. When dark came, they slipped deeper into the woods, following the slow logic of shadow and wind. They were crouched in a shallow hollow, spruce needles slick with frost, when the sweep began, low voices, glassy clicks of safeties, the steady comb of men who knew the ground. Light brushed the trunks, slid past, returned. Gray's hand went to the pistol. The boy's fingers found Gray's sleeve and held. A beam landed square on them. Halt. They froze. 5 figures stepped into the pool of snowlight, helmets rimmed white, scarves up, weapons down but ready. In front stood an older Feldwebel with a salt-gray mustache and eyes the color of the weather. He did not look at Gray first. He looked at the boy. The beam wobbled as the hand holding it trembled. The Feldwebel's mouth moved once before sound arrived. "Let," he said, quietly, to no one and everyone. "He is alive." The patrol shifted, the air loosening its grip. One of the younger soldiers lowered his machine pistol by a hair and took a step, then another. He bent at the knees to the child's height. "We heist do." The boy didn't answer. He reached under the jacket, pulled out the thin chain, and showed the dog tag as if it were a passport to the living. The older man leaned in to see the stamped name, nodded once, and something old and heavy left his face. "Unser Regiment," he murmured. "Sein Vater." Only then did he look at Gray. "Amerikaner," he said, as a fact, not an accusation. Another soldier circled behind, relieved Gray of his pistol with practiced kindness, tugged the chain at Gray's collar, and slipped off his own identification tags by mistake before finding Gray's. The tags were cold against a cold palm. The younger soldier lifted them, glanced to the Feldwebel for the next line in the script. It didn't come. Instead, the man beside the Feldwebel stepped forward, studying Gray as if he were a complicated weather report. "You could have killed him," he said in halting English. "Why didn't you?" Gray felt the boy's grip still on his sleeve. He swallowed Snowburn and spoke simply, because simple fit the air. "Because he isn't the enemy." Silence widened. A breath. The word hung there with the snow, refusing to fall. The younger men looked from the boy to the American and back, as if searching for the trap they'd been warned about and not finding it. Somewhere a branch cracked under the weight of winter and memory. The Feldwebel made a small gesture, command reduced to a hand. Rifles eased a fraction. He knelt, slow, until his face was level with the child's. "Calm," he said, not as an order but as a way offered. The boy hesitated and looked up at Gray as if the language he trusted most were still the line of a man's mouth. Gray nodded once. The boy rose, small boots biting the crust. The soldier behind Gray pressed the pistol back into its holster, not quite giving, not quite stealing, and held up the chain he'd lifted. The Feldwebel shook his head. "Nein." He took Gray's tags himself, weighed them for a heartbeat, then tossed them underhand so they struck Gray's chest and fell into his palm with the sound of small metal things choosing a side. Another private reached for the boy's shoulder and then stopped, switching instead to rest a hand lightly between the child's shoulder blades, as if heat could be shared through the wool. The boy looked once more at Gray. "Danke," he whispered, barely a breath, a word that had learned how to survive multiple wars. Gray's throat closed around its answer. He managed a nod. The older sergeant met Gray's eyes for the first time in a way that made rank useless. "Morgan," he began, searching for English, settling for truth instead. "War, gross." Today, he tapped his temple, then his chest. "Mensch." Man. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap, a gesture that might have been salute or blessing, then turned the patrol with a small swing of his wrist. They moved off between the trees, their light thinning to threads, their voices softening to syllables, then to breath, then to nothing. Snow healed the footprints even as they were made. Gray stood in the dark with his tags in his hand and the ghost weight of a small grip fading from his sleeve. The cold found him, honest and thorough. He waited until the last hint of glow was gone, until the woods remembered how to be only woods. Somewhere a far gun spoke and another answered, dutiful, tired. Gray sat down on the root he had been leaning against, the pistol heavy and ordinary again on his hip. The boy's scarf, stiff with dried blood from earlier, was still tied under his arm. He touched it, not to test the wound, but to be sure the knot had not come loose. In the dark, he tried to imagine the road the boy would take now, a dugout with straw on the floor and a card with his father's name, a mess tin steaming in hands that had done too much holding, the long, slow arithmetic of someone else's mercy. He tried and failed and tried again. Wind moved through the spruce in a slow, patient voice. Gray closed his fist around the tags until the edges bit his palm. He had not saved the child. That work belonged to strangers now, men with his face in their eyes and his name absent from their books. When they disappeared into the trees, Thomas Gray understood two facts at once: he had just lost the boy. And he had kept the man he still intended to be. The hospital near Liège smelled of disinfectant and snowmelt. January 1945. The war still breathed somewhere beyond the white windows, but here it was quieter, only the shuffle of crutches and the slow drip of morphine. Thomas Gray lay in a narrow bed, shoulder bound tight, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. He'd stopped counting the days. Time moved like cold syrup. A nurse changed his bandage with the efficiency of habit. "You're lucky," she said softly. "Most men from the Ardennes aren't." He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. Luck felt like a bad joke. That afternoon, a doctor brought an envelope, brown, soft from too many hands. "This was delivered through the chaplain's post," he said. "No sender." He left before Gray could ask. The handwriting on the front was careful, foreign, to any American who kept a child alive. Inside, no words, only a drawing in colored pencil. A tall soldier and a small boy under a crooked roof. The soldier's sleeve bore a green patch. The boy's coat dragged the ground. At the bottom, one word in shaky block letters: Danke. Gray stared until the colors blurred. The radiator hissed like distant static. He turned the paper over, a note in pencil, found near St. Vith. Boy taken in by German unit. No other details. He folded the paper gently, as if the creases might wound it. For a long moment he just sat there, listening to the hum of the ward. Somewhere, someone laughed, short, strained, human. Corporal Dwyer, 2 cots away, leaned on his crutch. "Heard your story," he said. "You went off map and came back bleeding. They say you saved a German kid. You'll get a medal, maybe." Gray shook his head. "Medals don't heal anything." Dwyer grinned. "They shine nice, though." Gray slipped the drawing under his pillow. "Not as bright as a kid's life." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Later, an adjutant arrived with papers. "Your absence is logged as a temporary deviation. No court-martial. The front's moving too fast for details." He smiled the tired smile of a man who'd signed too many names of the lost. "The war forgets quickly, Sergeant." Gray nodded. "People shouldn't." When night came, the ward turned silver with reflected snowlight. Most men slept. Gray didn't. He pulled the drawing from under his pillow, smoothing the folds. The pencil lines had pressed deep into the paper, a hand learning to make meaning. In one corner, a patch of blue. Maybe sky. Maybe scarf. He stared until his eyes burned. He tried to picture the boy, alive, growing, somewhere far from the noise. He hoped the scarf was real. A chaplain stopped by, leaving a small tin cross on the table. "Mail does people good," he said. Gray nodded. This one did. The next morning, nurses opened the windows. Outside, the snow had softened to slush, the air faintly sweet with thaw. A sparrow landed on the sill, first life he'd seen in weeks. For a moment, he thought of the boy's hand gripping his sleeve in the barn, of the word whispered through the dark, Danke. He reached for the drawing again. On the back, beneath the chaplain's note, he noticed faint writing almost erased by fingerprints: Aachen Parish Box, contact held. His pulse quickened. Maybe the boy was there. Maybe this wasn't the end. The nurse brought breakfast, breaking the thought. "You'll be back on your feet soon," she said. "War's nearly over." Gray smiled faintly. "It'll take longer than that." She didn't ask what he meant. When she left, he tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket, close to the bandage, over the steady beat of his heart. He thought about medals, orders, reports, all the things that vanish. But this paper, smudged and fragile, had survived battle and winter. It was proof of something the war couldn't erase. Outside, snow began again, softer this time, like forgiveness. Sometimes memory is the only reward worth wearing. Aachen, 1956. The city had learned silence. Streets once torn by shells now smelled of rain and coal smoke. Windows shone clean, trams hummed softly. In a cafe off the rebuilt square, Thomas Gray sat by the window, watching people walk where ruins once stood. He was older now, the lines on his face as permanent as the scars beneath his shirt. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, but the warmth of the cup steadied his hands. On the wall were black and white photographs, the same square in 1944, shattered. He looked at them without bitterness, only memory. From his jacket he drew a folded paper, worn and pale, a child's drawing. A tall soldier, a small boy, and one word in uneven German letters, Danke. The colors had faded, but the meaning had not. The door opened. A young man stepped in, shaking rain from his coat. Maybe 20, maybe 21. He scanned the room, eyes searching, until they stopped on Gray. He approached carefully, holding something in his hand. "Excuse me," he said in deliberate English. "Are you Sergeant Gray?" Gray looked up slowly. "I was." The young man opened his hand. In his palm lay a small metal tag, worn but legible. A German name, a serial number, a blood type. Gray knew it instantly, the boy's father's dog tag, the one he'd held in that frozen village so long ago. "My father," the young man said. "You found me in the barn. You didn't shoot." The word struck softly but went deep. Gray nodded. "You remember?" "Not everything," he said, smiling faintly. "But I remember your face. The jacket. You gave it to me." He sat down across from Gray. The cafe filled with quiet conversation, the clatter of cups, the low hum of ordinary life. Outside, the rain eased. "They told me later," the young man continued. "My father's unit found me. I was sent to relatives near Cologne. The priest said an American saved me." He hesitated, then placed another folded paper on the table. A newer drawing, the same two figures, drawn with an adult hand. "I copied it. The original stayed with you." Gray unfolded his version from his pocket, edges frayed from years of carrying. The two drawings lay side by side, almost identical. "Looks like we both kept proof," he said quietly. The young man's gaze dropped to Gray's hands, scarred, steady, older. "You could have killed me. Everyone else would have. Why didn't you?" Gray thought for a moment. The question had followed him for years, and the answer had never changed. "Because you weren't the enemy." The young man nodded, as if that confirmed something he'd always wanted to believe. "When I was a boy, I used to wonder why I lived. Now I know it wasn't luck. It was choice." For a while, neither spoke. The waitress brought more coffee and slipped away without breaking the silence. Outside, children played near the fountain, their laughter small and clean. "What happened to you after?" the young man asked. "I fixed radios," Gray said. "After you've listened to static long enough, you learn how to make silence work again." The young man smiled. "My cousin owns a print shop. I make posters. Paper, ink, they're my tools." "Maybe that's the same thing." Gray studied him, healthy, alive, ordinary. The kind of future no soldier dreams about but fights for anyway. He felt something unclench inside him. "You look like your father," he said. The young man touched the tag still resting on the table. "He was a soldier. You were too. But you chose different battles." He reached out, and Gray took his hand. The handshake was firm, human, no ceremony. For a moment, the war, the noise, the years, all of it, folded into that single touch. When the young man rose to leave, he placed the dog tag back in his pocket. "I keep it," he said. "Not for the war. For the name." He hesitated, then added softly, "There are men who make enemies, and men who make space for something better." You made space. Gray didn't answer. The door bell chimed as the young man left, the sound small but bright. Outside, the rain had stopped. People crossed the square with umbrellas closed, faces unafraid. Gray looked again at the two drawings. Then he folded his one carefully and tucked it inside his jacket, over the steady beat of his heart. He stepped into the street, feeling the cool air and the faint scent of wet stone. A boy ran past chasing a red ball, his mother calling after him, her voice light, not fearful. Gray watched them disappear into the crowd and understood what peace truly meant. War ends, he thought, not when the guns fall silent. But when you stop seeing an enemy. And start seeing a person.